to you all for making time to turn up at such short notice. I'm Rob Hamilton, Chief Economist at the Combined Authority, and I'm lucky today to be joined by a number of my colleagues. So you'll hear from Vicky Cuthbertson, Ruth Bull, Chrissy Page, Michelle Stone, and Maria Antonio. Just before we get started, there'll be there's a chat function or an opportunity for people to ask questions, and we'll come back to those questions at the end of today's session, or indeed answer them online. We also have an email address that's going to be posted on the final slide, so there's an opportunity to raise questions after the event. Obviously, the information that we provide is on a best endeavours basis. The guidance from government is still evolving, and in terms of the content today, it reflects our interpretation of government's guidance, and that might change over time. Clearly, we're also at the beginning of the process, and that's why we're undertaking this process of consultation. So, please bear with us if we don't have the answers to all your questions at this stage. And what I'm hoping is that over the next few weeks and couple of months, we'll be able to answer those questions, and obviously more detail and clarity will emerge through the consultation process. So let's get started in terms of the main content of today and today's session. So this is very much the first stage in the development of our investment plan. We're extremely keen to hold a briefing session as soon as possible after the guidance from government came out just before Easter to start the process. But obviously, because we're starting the process, we don't yet know all the answers and don't have all the guidance. But what we will do today is to set out what we do know about the Shared Prosperity Fund, about roles, and about responsibilities. We'll also outline the approach which is being taken by the North of Tyne Combined Authority. We're designated as the lead authority for the areas of Newcastle, North Tyneside and Northumberland. The government are expecting and have asked us to prepare an investment plan and proposals for SPF for that geography. We'll discuss the three themes of the SPF core and also the multiply programs today. We'll discuss the timetable. And as I mentioned, there's an opportunity for you to ask questions and also to identify issues which you'd like us to cover in more detail in the subsequent stakeholder consultation event. We'll confirm details of that first face-to-face stakeholder consultation event in due course, but if people were able to pencil in their diaries the morning of 16th of May, that would be fantastic, and we're hoping to arrange a venue and event for that date. So if we move on to what we know about the national programme, the national SPF programme. So in terms of the vision, so government's vision is very much about building pride in place and increasing life chances across the UK. And that's the overarching objective for the fund. In terms of the types of funding which will be available, there's revenue funding in the main, but there's also some capital funding. The capital funding elements increase gradually over time from about 10% to just a bit to around 20% over the 3 years of the fund. As we'll hear more about from my colleagues today, the key themes for the programme are communities in place, supporting local businesses and people and skills. The funding, there's £2.6 billion available nationally, and the funding profile, there's a little bit of money, there's £400 million available in 22-23 nationally, and that increases to £1.5 billion in 24-25. Within that overall funding envelope, government have ring-fenced an element for the Multiply programme, which we'll be hearing about later in today's session. So the Multiply programme is being dealt with slightly separately by government, and we'll cover it separately towards the end of the session. In terms of the objectives, so in addition to that overarching building pride in places and increasing life chances, they're specifying objectives and be looking for outputs and outcomes in areas like boosting productivity, pay, jobs and living standards, I guess relatively familiar targets for these sorts of socioeconomic regeneration opportunities. There's also an objective around spreading opportunities, improving public services, and a place-based element about restoring a sense of community, local pride and belonging. And in terms of the fund itself, government have designed and developed this fund to empower local leaders and local communities. And that's why we're particularly keen through the consultation process to hear people's views about the best way for that funding to be deployed. So that's the national fund. In terms of the implications for the North of Tyne Combined Authority, so government have provided the North of Tyne Combined Authority and all the other lead authorities with a non-competitive allocation for delivery across, in our case, across the 3 local authority areas of Newcastle, North Tyneside and Northumberland. There's just a little over £51 million in total available for the North of Tyne across those 3 areas and across those 3 years. And that's split between core SPF and the Multiply programme, with the vast majority of funding being for the core SPF programme. We would expect that the funding profile will rise each year with the national profile. Chrissy will come on to talk about some of the characteristics of how the programme will be delivered. But one of the important factors for many delivery organisations is that match funding is not a requirement of the fund, but obviously there's an opportunity potentially to boost value for money where match funding is provided. And as a lead authority, North of Tyne Combined Authority has to produce an investment plan. This investment plan needs to be submitted to government over the summer period, and subject to their approval, that will provide the backdrop and the basis for the subsequent interventions and programme rolling out. In terms of the investment plan, split into 3 main sections: local context, some details around the types of interventions that we'd want to fund, the outcomes we'd expect from that funding, and also to provide an overview of delivery, how we're looking to fund, how we're looking to deliver the fund, governance, the expenditure profile, and to provide government with reassurance around our project selection approach and resources plan. I guess the Combined Authority, we're lucky that we've been delivering devolved funding, and so we have a number of those processes already in place. But government will be expecting us to take into account those other funding sources and making sure that we're avoiding duplication and getting best overall value for money. In terms of sort of going back to the objectives for the fund, and absolutely key for us to consider as we move forward and develop the investment plan, and we seek your guidance on as we develop the proposals. It's important to recognise that government see the SPF as being a core part of their overall levelling up ambitions, as they recently set out in their white paper. In the white paper, there are 12 missions. So these were areas where they were looking by 2030 to either narrow the gap or to improve outcomes in an absolute sense in a number of areas. And in the sort of table at the bottom of this slide, you can see that what we've done is we've highlighted the levelling up missions and categorised them under the relevant SPF theme. And in terms of our own North of Tyne investment plan, clearly there'll be a need to focus in on these missions, to be thinking about ways in which we can make substantive and important changes to outcomes. We'll need to make sure that our plan is based on a robust evidence base, identify areas where perhaps we have relative weaknesses, or indeed take advantage of some of the fantastic assets that we have in the area. And of course, you know, as I'm sure we'll find out over the next few weeks and months, you know, it might not be possible to cover all these levelling up missions, and it may well not be possible. In fact, it won't be possible to cover all the interventions within those missions as well. So just moving on to the next slide as well. So in terms of of our investment plan, what this means for the North of Tyne Combined Authority area. We will be looking to build on existing priorities, corporate priorities as set out in the Combined Authorities corporate plan. We'll be seeking opportunities to broaden the range of interventions and outcomes. That's particularly true under all three areas of the SPF. And it's going to be really important. It's a great opportunity for us to complement some of the other devolved programs. So at the moment, over the first 5 years, Combined Authorities programme will be looking to deliver, well, we're delivering already £100 million investment programme. We've got funding around adult skills, brownfield housing, rural broadband. And so the SPF will be able to be integrated in with some of those other programmes. And in terms of the sort of next stages around our consultation process, clearly we'll be seeking feedback on evidence, on priorities, the types of interventions which we should be prioritising. We'll be seeking guidance about what's worked effectively previously across both European programmes and indeed other programmes. But also we're very open to ideas about how we can deliver better value for money. One of the things that the North of Tyne has been very keen on to date is about facilitating a collaborative approach across delivery partners. So we're keen to make sure that delivery partners are working in tandem and cooperation, and that there isn't of duplication of resources or kind of what we need to make sure is that ultimately our residents and businesses are served in the most appropriate and effective way through these interventions. So that's all from me in terms of setting the scene for the programme, providing details about the national context and what it means for the Combined Authority area. But I'd now like to introduce Vicky Cuthbertson, the Strategic Housing and Infrastructure Manager, who will be talking about the first two of the SPF themes. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the Community in Place priority. The Community in Place investment priority aims to support economic development at the neighbourhood level and strengthen the social fabric of our communities. There are two key objectives linked to the Community in Place priority, and that is to strengthen our social fabric and foster a sense of local pride and belonging through investment in activities that enhance physical, cultural and social ties and access to amenities, and building resilient, healthy and safe neighbourhoods through investment in quality of places where people want to live, work, play and learn in. As Rob mentioned earlier, there's a strong link to the Levelling Up White Paper, and there's an overarching mission, Mission 9, which cuts across all the priority themes. And then there are other missions that each of the investment priorities contribute to. For the Community in Place priority, this includes the narrowing gap in health life expectancy, so that the gap between the worst areas and the better areas reduces, that there's an improvement in well-being, again with the gap between top performing and other areas reducing, and that neighbourhood crime will have fallen, as well as homicide and serious crime. Alongside the prospectus that many of you will have looked at already prior to today's presentation, there's also guidance on the type of interventions, objectives, outcomes and outputs that the government will support through the UKSPF. It mentions that these interventions are like a menu of activities that local areas can choose from based on local need and opportunities, and we'll work with partners in the coming months to determine what those interventions are that best meet the needs and opportunities of the North of Tyne area. For those of you who've already read that guidance, you'll see that there's quite a lot of interventions under the Community in Place theme. There's 15 in total. And for today's event, we've categorised them into the following key areas. This includes community infrastructure and town centre high streets improvements, and improvements to built and natural environment to design out crime. There's also a very strong strand around supporting the capacity of local groups in the regeneration of their local areas and ensuring that communities are engaged in that process. There's also opportunities to fund social action, to encourage people to volunteer and deliver improvements to their local area. The cultural heritage and tourism theme is about investing in local cultural heritage offer and also campaigns to encourage more visitors to the area. And finally, in terms of the way we've clustered the interventions, there's also support for green spaces and climate change resilience. This includes measures to improve open spaces, increase resilience to natural hazards such as flooding, measures to encourage active travel, and also key climate change actions such as improvements to energy efficiency and measures to combat fuel poverty. And now we'll give you an overview on the supporting local business priority. Again, very similar to the communities in place investment priority, going to give an overview of the objectives, how this links to the levelling up white paper missions, and then the range of interventions that can be supported through UKSPF. In terms of the supporting local business priority, this will enable places to fund interventions that support local businesses to thrive, innovate and grow. There are a number of objectives under this theme, and that includes creating jobs and boosting community cohesion through investments that support businesses to start up to visible improvements to local retail, hospitality and leisure sector facilities. There's also another objective about networking and collaboration to bring businesses together to encourage them to stimulate innovation and growth. And then the third objective is about increasing private sector investment through targeted support for SMEs to undertake new to firm innovation, adopt productivity, develop climate change measures, and start or grow their exports. Again, this links to the levelling up missions, which are about improving pay, employment and productivity, again with the gap between the top performing and other areas closing. And then specifically around R&D, they want to see R&D outside the southeast increase by at least 40%, with government funding seeking to leverage at least twice as much private sector investment. So it's really about how this fund can be used to unlock private sector investment. Again, like the community and place theme, there's 16 interventions that could be supported through UKSPF, and we've reduced these down to 6 for the purposes of today's presentation. This again includes a focus on place recovery, supporting local markets, retail and small businesses in neighbourhood areas, innovation and translating R&D, and that could be both revenue and capital. This include business support and grants, as well as support for the wider R&D infrastructure. Business startups and growth, including incubators, accelerators, and access to finance, as well as angel investor networks. Promotion of sector strengths, particularly around how businesses can grow their exports, and grants could be used to enable that to happen, as well as how we put the areas on the map by hosting national and international events that will support local growth sectors. There's also support for the social economy, including social enterprises and cooperatives, and this could take the form of advice, training, mentorship, and access to workspace. And then there's also a key theme around climate change and the transition to net zero by maximising existing and emerging local strengths in low carbon technologies, as well as enabling businesses to adapt to climate change. I'm now going to hand over to Ruth Gall, our Senior Programme Manager on Employability, who's going to talk about the People and Skills Investment Priority.
Thanks, Vicky. Through the People and Skills Investment Priority, lead authorities can use funding to help reduce the barriers some people face to employment and support them to move towards employment and education. Authorities can also target funding into skills for local areas to support employment and growth. Referring back to the slide, Vicky's already mentioned that obviously there's lots of information in the prospectus. I'm going to focus on the objectives for this theme, identify the links to the levelling up white paper missions, and then again we've clustered together some of the interventions that we could start delivering in relation to this theme. So there's 3 objectives within the People and Skills theme. We have supporting economically inactive people to overcome barriers to work by providing cohesive, locally tailored support, including access to basic skills. This is very much the objective that has the interface with Multiply, and my colleague Michelle will provide you with more detail later on in this presentation in relation to that programme. The second objective is supporting people furthest from the labour market to access basic skills. And finally, skills to progress in work and to fund local skills needs. As Vicky mentioned, what we're trying to do here is to provide you with the links to the missions within the Levelling Up paper. So we have 5 links to these missions within this theme: improve pride in place, pay, employment and productivity, to increase training, to narrow the gap in healthy life expectancy, and to improve well-being. And finally, you would have all read the prospectus, so there's a huge range of interventions that can be undertaken. For this presentation today, I've clustered them to 3 specific areas. So the first area, employment support to economically inactive, with a focus on intensive wraparound support. Moving on to skills, activities to increase basic skills, which contribute to community cohesion, promoting well-being and increasing levels of digital inclusion. And then finally, tailored local skills. There is an emphasis on technical and vocational qualifications, green skills, retraining within the carbon sectors, and finally, digital skills. I'm now going to hand you over to Chrissy Page. Chrissy is our Principal Investment Programme Manager, who will take you through the delivery processes and timelines.
Thanks, Ruth, that's great. So I'm going to quickly just kind of run through some points that have come from the prospectus, just really from a kind of delivery perspective. We've got more information that's available on the gov.uk website. And I think further details are going to follow as well. You know, as we get further guidance from government on kind of the intricacies of delivery, and also as we further develop our investment plan as well. So obviously, subject to the approval of our investment plan, NTCA are going to be responsible, you know, for kind of delivery of the UKSPF allocations. So this includes kind of managing the assessment of and approval of applications, processing the payments, also the day-to-day monitoring as well. As the lead authority, we've got some flexibility over how we want to deliver the funding, but the prospectus sets out, you know, a few options around using a mix of competitions, calls for funding, also around procurement, commissioning, and also, you know, in some instances, you know, there might be a case for delivering some of that activity in-house as well. The prospectus is quite clear around the need to incorporate local partnership groups as well. And it also sort of sets out a list of suggestions about, you know, the types of organisations or individuals who should be included as well within this. There's also an option to use existing groups, providing that they're fully representative and that the terms of reference meet the fund's needs. So I think, you know, within the North of Tyne, how this will kind of work out is still to be decided, and we're just kind of working, you know, we'll work through that, you know, as we develop our investment plan and you know, and work through the detail both of the prospectus and further guidance as well that comes from government, and also, you know, in response to kind of the consultation process as well. So, you know, we're a public, obviously holders of the public purse. This is sort of funding that we're managing. You know, we need to make sure that we're kind of open and transparent in what we're doing. We also need to make sure that we include sufficient assurance arrangements, you know, within our processes, you know, and that we have that comfort that projects will deliver compliantly and in line with their contractual agreements. You know, I think our sort of intention within North of Tyne Combined Authority is very much to try and align with this with our other investment programmes and trying to sort of set it up so we're using similar processes and approaches, you know, while also ensuring that we meet the requirements that are set out in the prospectus. But I think, you know, while the sort of details to follow, you know, I think I can safely say, you know, it should be a lot lighter than EU funding has been previously, you know, with sort of less levels of, you know, of assurance checking as well within that. So within the investment plan, we also need to set out kind of expenditure and deliverables as well. So we need to put in some high level outputs and outcome figures that government are going to monitor us against, you know, in terms of progress. Government have provided a list of UKSPF outputs and indicators. These are available on the gov.uk website as part of, and then there also sort of, I think there's a link within the UK SPF prospectus as well. So, you know, with the process that we'll be going through internally as well is looking at how we can align these with our current North of Tyne ones as well, and making sure, you know, that these are fully embedded within our programme. The funding's confirmed over 3 financial years. So, you know, that's starting sort of this year in 22-23, and that's running through to the 31st of March 2025. You know, what government have confirmed to us as well is that lead authorities will have to return any underspend at the end of the financial year. You know, so with that in mind, you know, the deliverability aspects as well of UK shared prosperity projects, you know, will be really important to us. Investments can start from the 1st of April this year, you know, in instances where projects fit the relevant interventions, but they would need to follow all of the fund requirements. So I think it's probably important, you know, to kind of mention that this will be very much at the discretion of the combined authority. And if it is agreed, you know, the risks associated with that will also need to be managed as well. In terms of kind of end dates, all the interventions need to be complete by the 31st of March 2025. From the information provided, we're assuming that this is kind of the financial completion date of projects. But as further detail comes out, you know, we should be able to confirm that. And similarly around match funding as well. I know Rob picked up on this earlier. So again, this isn't a requirement within the investment plan, but we're strongly encouraged to consider it on an individual project basis as well. You know, and I think this is generally quite standard with grants as well. You know, depending on the type of intervention and the type of activity, you know, it's not appropriate for all. Where there are opportunities, you know, to maximise that value for money and that impact as well, you know, we will be kind of looking at making sure that that's incorporated. The prospectus also sets out, there's a number of ineligible costs, you know, within the prospectus. I think, you know, these are probably pretty much in line with other grant programmes that we've seen, you know, including the kind of previous structural investment funds and the other North of Tyne funds as well. You know, so things like reclaimable VAT, you know, statutory fines. You know, I won't go through the list in detail, but it is all there online as well. And similarly, you know, we need to make sure that we're legally compliant. You know, subsidy control and how we manage that needs to be embedded within our processes. You know, making sure that all of our projects, you know, are delivering in line with the subsidy control regime. And also, you know, from a procurement perspective as well, you know, we need to make sure that we're compliant with the relevant regulations. And that's both, you know, ourselves, you know, when we're procuring anyone to sort of deliver activity through UKSPF, but also for kind of grant beneficiaries as well, you know, as appropriate within that. Probably comes as no surprise to anyone, there's branding and communication guidance that's come out, you know, with specific UK government logos as well. And kind of reference to the UK Shared Prosperity Fund as well, and an expectation that this will be used on all publicity around kind of projects and the programme as well. And there's also mention around a requirement for plaques as well, you know, with further detail on that to follow over the summer. And then finally, I'll just kind of pick up on monitoring and evaluation as well. So, you know, this monitoring will be taking place of spend and outputs and outcomes. You know, we'll be expecting our projects to report to us on a kind of quarterly basis minimum, and then we'll be kind of collating that and having to feed that information to government, you know, in order for them to monitor our progress as well. Evaluation as well, you know, is very much going to be embedded within the programme, and you know, we have to set out within our investment plans how this will be managed. And what government have said is, you know, there'll be kind of both sort of national-led evaluations, which will include a scoping study in partnership with the What Works Centre for Local Economic Growth, but also evaluations will be requested at a local level as well. So this will be sort of looking at investments being supported by, theories of change, a logical framework or a logic chain, and also, looking at kind of locally led process evaluations or causal impact evaluations as well, as appropriate. Okay, just move on to the next slide, Melissa. Thanks. Great, so this slide, this just sets out the timeline really, just to give you a bit of an overview and kind of what's happening next over the sort of next few months. So I think as Rob kind of touched on as well in his introduction, through April to June, this is where lead authorities, this is where we'll be working very closely with stakeholders, to develop our investment plans as well. And it's very much our intention, to put in place a number of consultation events as well. So watch this space. We're very close to sort of finalising the date of the first one. We're hoping to do some of these face-to-face, and we're hoping to get the first one in around kind of mid-May as well. Over the summer period, government have advised they're going to publish further guidance as well on monitoring, sort of benefits evaluation around assurance, subsidy control, branding and publicity as well. So as that comes out, we'll make sure that we're kind of communicating that out as well, and also, it'll be sort of taken into consideration as part of our investment planning too. We have a window to submit our investment plan, so that opens on the 30th of June, and then it closes on the 1st of August as well. With government set to review those investment plans through September, and then then confirm kind of approval of them towards the end of September and the beginning of October. So we're looking, hoping to have a launch date around the 1st of October, and kind of programme delivery from that all the way through to the 31st of March 2025. And it's probably important actually just to point out as well that this is the timeline for the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and Multiply is a slightly different timeline as well, which leads me on nicely to hand over to my colleague Michelle Stone, who is our skills lead, and will give you a bit of an update on the Multiply programme. Thanks.
Thanks, Chrissy. So yes, one of the first priorities of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund will be for the new Multiply programme. And the ambition of this programme is to help people improve their numeracy skills, particularly their ability to understand and use maths in daily life, improving household finances. This could helping children with homework and making more sense of facts and figures. I think this is a government priority, given that 17 million adults across the UK have got numeracy skills which are equivalent to children in primary school, and this doesn't bode well against OECD stats on numeracy levels in other nations. So a really big priority of the government to improve numeracy overall. To achieve that, to improve that numeracy levels across the country, Multiply will offer a range of options, including personal tutoring, digital training and flexible courses that really fit around people's lives and are tailored to meet specific needs and circumstances. And the DFE have produced a menu of options in terms of what the Multiply programme can offer, and that is included in more detail in the Multiply prospectus. So that, as I said, the main objectives of the Multiply programme are to increase the levels of functional numeracy in the adult population, and the DFE have identified the following success measures. And the first one being that more adults will achieve maths qualifications up to level 2. So that's like a GCSE or a functional skills equivalent, and an increase in participation in numeracy across the piece. Another objective is to improve labour market outcomes through the Multiply programme, and this is like fewer numeracy skills gaps being reported by employers, and an increase in the number of adults that progress into employment and education. Poor numeracy can be a huge barrier to accessing employment, apprenticeships, etc. So a big objective there around getting people into work through improved numeracy. And then increased adult numeracy across the population, which goes beyond certificates or qualifications, but it actually tracks both perceived and actual differences. Involvement in numeracy has on learners to improve their understanding of maths and feel more confident with maths. Again, barriers to accessing maths classes can come from a poor experience at school with maths, and a fear, if you like, of numeracy as a programme. So it's going to be really important that we use some varied engagement strategies to deliver this programme across the NTCA region. If I could just get the next slide. Yeah. So just with the rest of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, we do need to produce an investment plan for Multiply. This will be a separate investment plan from the main investment plan that's developed for the wider UK Shared Prosperity Fund programme. The Multiply programme is being managed by combined authorities and the Greater London Authority, as well as upper tier or unitary authorities in non-devolved areas. And we have all been invited to develop investment plans for bespoke numeracy provision against that national menu of interventions, which includes things like support and employment, family learning, numeracy learning for prisoners or those out on licence, and there is a wide range of options in there. The interventions that will be delivered through the Multiply programme will need to be additional and differentiated from what is already funded through the adult education budget legal entitlement, and the Multiply programme should not displace that provision. And again, this is about this numeracy delivery being innovative and different from the mainstream provision delivered through the adult education budget. We will be developing our interventions and are encouraged to develop our interventions in partnership with various stakeholders, which include providers, employers, and other partners across the NTCA to maximise the value for money for this programme. And the table on the slide there just gives you an indication of the funding, the Multiply programme funding allocation for the North of Tyne, which overall is just over 4 million, 4.1 million, and that's been spread over the 3 years of the programme quite evenly, really, with 1.2 million in the first year, 1.4 in the second, and 1.4 in the third. And as Chrissy said, the timelines for the Multiply programme are slightly different to the main UK Shared Prosperity Fund programme, in that the Multiply investment plan will need to be submitted to the Department for Education by the 30th of June 2022, and delivery of the Multiply programme will need to commence from September 2022. And NTCA over the next few weeks, certainly into May and June, before we submit that investment plan, will be consulting with stakeholders and partners across the piece, so that we get as much input into that investment plan from our stakeholders as possible. So I'm now going to hand you back to Rob, who I think is going to start the Q&A. That's
great. Thank you very much indeed, Michelle, and to all my colleagues for running through the details. So we've had a number of questions in both the chat and the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to work our way through those questions as we go. Perhaps the best place to start, but very briefly, is with some of the Q&A questions which have already been answered. Draw your attention to the chat function. But I can, in response to Simon Allen's question, I can assure colleagues that we're working with the LEP and other colleagues across the region to understand what's worked best from the 2014 to 2020 programme, but also sort of previous understanding of what's worked for European programme and indeed other programmes as well. We've also had clarity that basic digital skills will be included. There's a question about when we're anticipating actual projects and interventions to commence delivery. Now, as Chrissy mentioned, that we're hoping that government will confirm and approve our investment plan by October 2022. There is an opportunity, however, for the combined authority and delivery organisations to agree to allow some projects to start from the 1st of April. So to have already started, I guess. Now, obviously, that has to be at the discretion of the combined authority, and we'll have to consider about where risks would reside. In particular, the delivery organisation would have to be prepared to deliver at risk. So I guess over the next 2 or 3 months, we'll have to think more about how we can think about making sure we're able to get off to a flying start really for 22-23 programme period. Also, in terms of answered questions, we had a question from Claire Worley about building on existing combined authority priorities, and yes, indeed, the wellbeing framework, we're in a good position that the combined authority earlier this year published details of a wellbeing framework which provides a more rounded view of outcomes and conditions within the North of Tyne area than just looking solely at the headline indicators like GDP and unemployment. So that would be really important for us as we develop up the evidence base for the SPF. Perhaps if I turn now to the open Q&A sort of questions, and I'll pick up some of the questions and also invite my colleagues in as well. In response to Jim's question about, do we have a sort of starter for 10 proposal on the table about how the UKSPF will work? I'm sorry, we don't. We actually are very keen to make sure that we go about things in a relatively measured process. And although the combined authority, we've done a lot of work in terms of our own and current investment priorities, we're going to make sure we have a good look at the evidence. We want to hear from colleagues, particularly at the consultation event, which is scheduled for 2 or 3 weeks' time. And only really at that stage would we want to pull together a proposal for a sort of split for how we would sort of deliver the fund and the detailed objectives. In terms of sort of some of the other questions here, I might ask one of my colleagues about the definition of economically inactive as it applies to the multiplied fund. I wonder if I could turn to Ruth yourself for that question.
Yes, thanks, Rob. Sorry, we're having problems in this office with internet connection at the minute, I'm afraid to say. Can I come back to you in 2 minutes on that? Well, I just have a review of the question. Is that okay? Sorry, we've been off.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Well, what we'll do also is we'll respond to questions online after this event. Another question related to the point I raised previously around projects which potentially could be funded from the 1st of April 2022, which I recognise is in the past rather than the future, and so we'd need to think about what an earliest realistic date for some of those projects to spend against. We've also had a question from Sue about underspend being clawed back each year. I wonder if I could introduce Chrissy or invite Chrissy to respond to this question.
Yes, of course, Rob. Yeah, so I mean, this came out in the webinar that DLUC held yesterday. around how underspend will have to sort of give back any underspend. You know, I think you're right, there is a bit of a risk. We've got a very tight timeline, haven't we, in year one, in which to deliver, and I think it's certainly something, you know, that we will be looking at, you know, both within the combined authority and also working very closely, you know, with sort of key stakeholders and delivery partners as well, you know, to have a think about how we manage that, to make sure that we do maximise the funding within the area. I think as well, you know, there's further guidance that's due to come out from government. You know, I think there's some of the detail that's missing, you know, around how this will work in practice. You know, and I think, you know, from our perspective, it'd be quite helpful if there was a bit more flexibility in years 1 and 2 around that. But I guess we'll have to wait and see, you know, whether that's something that government will be open to or not, going forward. But certainly, you know, I think we will be looking at, you know, making sure that we do all that we can to make sure we maximise the funding in the region.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Chrissy. So slightly confusingly, or at least for me, there's an opportunity to ask questions through both the Q&A and the chat, but I'll turn now to the questions in the chat function, and then perhaps encourage people to use that function rather than the Q&A from now onwards for the remaining 10 minutes of today's session.
Rob, can I just point out in relation to economically inactive, I've just had a quick look at the question there, and all I would say is that from the authority's perspective, we have in the past before adopted DWP's definition of economically inactive, but I think as part of the consultation process, I think what we'd like to do is use the opportunity, these consultation sessions, to actually seek from stakeholders their feedback in relation to economically inactive and how wide this definition should be. Is that okay?
Thank you. Yeah, that's brilliant. Ruth, whilst you're talking about definitions, we've also had a question around to the self-employed qualified creative freelance. I'm not entirely sure the context for this. I'm imagining that this is a question about whether there's eligibility for the multiply program. So actually, perhaps it's a question for Michelle instead.
Absolutely, Rob, and yes, I can't see the question like you. I'm a little bit mixed between the two chat functions, but certainly the self-employed do qualify.
Okay, great. Thank you very much indeed. There's a question about the Levy Up white paper referring to the potential to expand the North of Tyne combined authority to other parts of the region, and that is indeed the case, that there are discussions going on about that. There's also within the white paper sort of clarity that governments are seeking for other parts of the country to form other parts of the country where there aren't combined authorities to form combined authorities. So I guess the white paper signals an expectation that, if you like, the governance arrangements are going to change and evolve quite a bit in the next few years in the UK. My understanding of government's guidance is that they are expecting that UK Shared Prosperity Fund investment plans and delivery arrangements should fit with the structures largely as they are at the moment, with a couple of exceptions, including in Cumbria. So my expectation is that we would continue to see investment plans for all the lead authority areas here in the Northeast. But clearly, if there was a decision to expand the combined authority, there might be an opportunity in the future to think about how we sort of simplify arrangements or rationalise on activities. Just going through the chat questions again, I'm absolutely certain that we'll be making sure that there's sort of digital and online provision as well as face-to-face. There's quite a technical question, Michelle, around the Multiply programme, about whether the Multiply programme is materially different to legal entitlement under AB. I'm not sure if you'd want to pick that one up now or in due course.
Obviously, the consultations and working with partners will determine the types of programme, but in terms of differentiation from AEB, I think it's important to say that the Multiply programme doesn't necessarily have to contain any qualifications from the legal entitlements. So it can be non-regulated, engaging numeracy provision to actually move people into that provision. So that's certainly one differentiation. But absolutely, Rob, I think the outcome of how we differentiate it entirely will come from the views of our partners and stakeholders, and will be answered a bit further down the line in those meetings.
That's great, thank you, Michelle. Sorry, Michelle, whilst you've got the microphone, there's again quite a technical question about the Multiply programme having a national platform, whereas here we're talking about delivery that's shaped according to requirements in the region. Are you able to help resolve that conundrum?
I am. So absolutely. I mean, obviously the Multiply allocation that's been given to the North of Tyne is for delivery in our region, bespoke delivery in our region. But equally, the Department for Education are developing a national online platform that will contain courses, programmes that will be accessible online nationally as an overall programme. So that is a national IT platform being developed by the department, and they are hoping that will be ready in the autumn to sit alongside the start of the Multiply programmes being delivered across the regions.
Brilliant, thank you, Michelle. I'm also keen to invite my colleague Maria into the discussion to answer a question around a rural investment plan.
Thanks, Rob. Sorry, I was starting to type the answer, but just to sort of give some comfort that sort of rural growth is something that we will pick up as a cross-cutting theme across the investment plan. But as an additional piece of information, although in EODF there was a sort of a specific strand on rural growth, what we're doing as a combined authority area, we're developing a joint stewardship and rural growth investment plan with stakeholders at the moment, which will set out a common approach on how we can deal with some of the issues and how we can take innovative approaches to investment. And that can feed into the investment plan for UKSPF, but also the combined authorities, devolved investment fund, but also start a conversation with government in terms of how we can draw down funding to take advantage of opportunities in our rural economies and rural areas.
Brilliant, thank you. And there's a question also about translational research and development, and I think this probably refers to sort of some of the language that we've used on the slide. So as my colleagues have mentioned, we've tried to compress down a prospectus of sort of 50 or so pages down into a dozen slides. In terms of research and development, we think it's incredibly important to do all we can to increase levels of research and development here in the northeast as a part of the country, where levels of R&D, particularly private sector led R&D, are relatively low compared to in other places across the UK or indeed across the OECD as a whole. I think in terms of translational R&D, certainly what I would interpret by that is about supporting research and development in businesses or indeed in universities and other organisations that will lead into business outcomes. So it's very much about the translation of research and development into products and goods and services and economic growth. In terms of questions, I don't see any further questions in the chat function that we haven't addressed, although I'm happy for my colleagues to chip in if they want to clarify any questions there. On the Q&A, sorry, Ruth.
Sorry, I was just going to say, if you haven't moved into the Q&A, there was a question there about how they engage in the stakeholder events, Rob.
Yes. So sorry, I haven't quite got to that one.
Right.
Would you like me to come in on that one?
Yeah, please, if you could.
When you're reading it. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of consultation, you know, we're kind of coming up with a kind of communication and consultation plan at the moment. We know that there's going to be kind of different approaches to this. You know, we're looking at running a face-to-face event in the middle of May. You know, and we're also going to be exploring other options as well that are available to us, you know, as we develop our investment plan, to make sure that we really get that kind of input and that spread, you know, across all the relevant kind of organisations and kind of stakeholders and interested parties as well. So I guess I can't give you all of the detail today, but you know, it's certainly something that we're kind of working through at the moment. And I would suggest, you know, we've got a web page on our website as well, and we'll be posting sort of further updates and information on that as well, and looking at how we maybe, you know, communicate with interested parties as well going forward. So we'll kind of keep you posted on progress.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Chrissy. And actually, that's an excellent point, I think, to sort of bring a conclusion to today's webinar. So thank you very much indeed to everyone who's been able to attend the event today. We will make the slides available on our website. We are incredibly grateful for all the comments and feedback today, but as Chrissy was saying, we would encourage further comments and suggestions to that email address, and in particular issues that people would like us to get into further in the stakeholder consultation session. So that would be where we really look to try and drill down into the evidence and into the interventions that we're looking to secure. Please also sort of bear with us for another week or so. As a combined authority, we're in the pre-election period, so we're a little bit restricted on the communications that we can go out with. But what I said so previously, we are looking to hold a wider consultation event on the morning of the 16th of May, and we'll provide further details as soon as we can on that. But thank you very much indeed to everyone attending the event, and also to my colleagues at the Combined Authority for answering questions and providing content. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.